and welcome to the Creativity Conference podcast, the first episode of 2024. Today, I'm joined by the wonderful Amy Peck, who is the founder and CEO of EndeavorXR, Web3 and metaverse consultant, and just knower of all things, essentially.
Yes, I'm omniscient.
She's joining us from LA, and it's an absolute pleasure to have you here. Amy, how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm sort of sliding into now the new year and about to gear up for some more travel. Very excited for what 2024 holds, and yeah, very happy to be here as well.
From what you can remember of joining us back in October and in June in New York, how did you find the events? Were there any takeaways or sessions that you particularly enjoyed?
I think just in general, the whole theme is of creativity is so broad, and I think it touches business in ways that we don't really think about or talk about as much. And then from a pure creativity standpoint, in industries where we normally think that creativity is sort of abounds, whether it's in the entertainment business or music business or games, you're starting to see all of these elements kind of converge in how we look at business in general. So creativity, I think, in general just isn't limited to creative industries necessarily. I think we have to be creative across really every industry that we have today.
Right. And you personally have done work with JP Morgan, and you've had a bit of a background in traditionally untypically creative fields. How did you make that jump from those to what you're doing now?
Well, it's interesting because when I started my career, I was working kind of in creative arenas, but much more on the business side. So how to, my mother was in the fashion industry, but I looked at her business as a business. I worked in, television commercials and music videos. I was actually started my career in music licensing for Polygram in the UK, and later for Rough Trade Records. So anyone who's like Smith's fan, or when I was there, it was James and the Sundays and the KLF, like some great old school bands. I'm dating myself. So that was a creative industry, but I looked at that and said, how do we take some of these great artists that are, in the UK and, well known in the UK and in Europe, and expand them to the rest of the world? And so that was my role, was to find, distribution and find ways and opportunities and tours for our artists to be in the US, to be in Australia. And I found it really fascinating because I still think it's really creative. I still had to come up with creative deals. I had to think of things, sort of be a little bit outside the box in approach. And it was just exciting being in a field where the artists were so talented and so amazing. So I feel like that kind of rubbed off on me a little bit in my approach through my career.
Did you get any advice from anybody while you were doing that was particularly, paradigm shifting for you?
No, but I gave some advice to one of our artists who will remain nameless. He's very well known. And we were at a meeting. We had this whole team of potential distributors, otherwise known as the suits by some of the artists, who had come in from abroad. He's a creative genius and just doesn't like people in sort of the establishment. And so he sat at the table and had a little plastic spider that was attached to a tube that had a little sort of squeezy air thing on the other side. And he kept squeezing the thing and making the spider hop every time they asked a question. And so, we had a little tea break as we do in the UK. And I took him aside and I said, maybe the spider is not the thing to have at this meeting. which, he didn't put it away, but he was a little bit more engaged after. But he's still like making the spider hop around. And it was just the most curious thing I'd ever seen in a meeting at that point. I've seen crazier stuff since then.
What could possibly be crazier than a jumping spider as a nervous tick in a meeting?
It was funny because I sort of found it so amusing that I didn't even want to tell him to stop, but you could tell it was really kind of ruffling the feathers of our guests. And I was just trying to explain to the translator that, he's just very creative and he's very sensitive. And that's when he's processing things, like that's one of the, he needs to have something to do. And they seemed to think that that was okay.
Well, that's something that I think a lot of creatives have to deal with fairly often. People take a painter or a content creator, all they want to do is just do their creative thing, whether that's make videos or make art. But more and more nowadays, you've also got to be a social media manager, you've got to be a web designer, you've got to be all these other things, you've got to take meetings, you've got to manage your own business. How do you juggle all of that?
I love it all. Like, I find it all really fun and exciting. There are aspects of, my business that I learned early on that I was not good at. In fact, my bookkeeper has now forbid me from going into QuickBooks and creating new clients. I can send an invoice if it's already existing, like that I'm allowed to do. I can't be all things to all clients, but what I do have is a network of the most brilliant people around the world who are SMEs in their lane, subject matter experts, that I bring on board. So, the beauty of all of this is that you don't have to know everything, but you do have to know what you don't know. And that's one of the most kind of key components in business. And it's the same when I work with founders, right? Founders don't have to be able to do everything, but that's always my advice to them is like, you don't have to be great at everything, but don't pretend to be great at something that you're not. Know what your limitations are, because we have access to amazing people around the world who can help you. And I think that's true in really any business.
Don't be afraid to ask for help and get friendly with people who are better than you at certain things that you need help with.
Yeah, don't be the smartest person in the room. Like, you don't want to be the smartest person in the room.
You're the product of the 5 people you spend the most time with, and if those 5 people are all smarter than you, chances are you're going to get better at a lot of things very quickly.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Taking a little step back, growing up, what were some of your biggest sources of inspiration, and what did you do to keep the creative juices flowing?
I really loved kind of art and music growing up, but I was definitely like, I was an athlete. And so I was consumed with being really, really good at my two sports, which were, you would call it football, soccer here in the US, and tennis. What that did really was give me incredible discipline in terms of what to focus on and what's important. But I really enjoyed, and I don't think I was great at it, but I really enjoyed, we had an amazing series of art teachers that had different specialties. It just colors the way you think. And it's something that I've taken with me in how I work today. And when I am doing, talks around the world, or I'm doing workshops, is how to get people to think creatively. So it's not so much learning the discipline and becoming a craftsperson necessarily. What it is opening up kind of neural pathways in your brain that creative thought enables. Because when you're on this kind of linear path and you're making sort of decisions based on everything you think you know all the time, you don't have then this expansive thought that you need to solve some of the big problems in business today and really around the world today when you think about it.
Yeah, and you can apply a lot, as you say, the discipline of tennis, for example, you can apply that to a lot of things.
Mhm.
There's a book called The Inner Game of Tennis by Timothy Galway, which is about tennis, but it's about getting in the that total focus zone. And I know improv performers who apply that to their shows, or when they're really in the middle of improv, like they'll use the same techniques. So yeah, having that background is, I imagine, really quite useful in your career.
it taught me to be calm in the face of disaster, because when I first started, I had one player who was my nemesis, and she was really, really consistent. And I was stronger than she was, but she was really, really consistent. And I used to really lose my temper. And I had a great coach who was just like, you need to take a deep breath, because you have to play the long game. Don't play her game, play your game. But the minute you lose your temper, you're playing her game. And I thought that was really good advice. And so I kind of carried that through. And it turns out I've been in kind of two significant emergencies in my life, and then some smaller ones. And you don't really know how you're going to react in an emergency. And the good news is a lot of that sort of training helped me be very, very calm. Like, it can be fire and brimstone around me. And I just take a deep breath and I look at like everyone around me and how to get everybody to safety. And that was a nice thing in an unfortunate circumstance to learn about myself.
You don't want to have to test those skills, but sometimes it just happens.
Well, that's where VR comes in. We can practice it in VR ad nauseum now.
Yeah, there's a lot of emerging uses for VR in many fields, medicine and aerospace, and the list goes on. Where do you see for the creative fields in particular, how creative is gonna be enabled by this technology in the next 10, 20 years?
Well, I really think it's going to change the way we tell stories. And I think what you're seeing emerge is this plethora of creator tools that are available. And I think in a lot of ways, sadly, we're focused on kind of the commercialization of our, influence, as it were. So creators are out there trying to gain influence in order to be able to, make a living, which is great. But a lot of times it's making a living then influencing their audience to buy products. And I think that that's just a very 1.0 way of looking at it. However, what it is doing is it's inviting a much broader swath of people to this kind of creator economy that's burgeoning. And as even VR starts to take hold, and really I think AR is going to be bigger in the long run, and already is now, to some degree. And so looking at different business models to monetize, where really it's more about monetizing the creativity itself, monetizing the art form, monetizing kind of the entertainment value, versus using your influence to just hawk products, right? Because at the end of the day, we're having a problem with the truth, right? We have these AI agents that are out there. We don't know whether articles are sourced by humans or by AI, and there's bad actors. And so this idea of truth and kind of veracity is going to really be challenged. And I think if you have someone who is a person of influence who is hawking products, they're going to be called into question as like, are you really using this product? Or are you just doing it to make money off of your audience? And so I think we need to shift focus. And again, this is going to be a creative exercise in and of itself, on what these new business models are, and what the creator economy really truly unlocks. And to me, at the core is storytelling, and being able to tell your story in your way. And that can be a very personal story. It can be made up stories. It can be your music. It can be, anything that you create. But I think, I'd love to see us find ways to enable the creator economy around talent and excitement and gaming and music, and just these sort of core art forms that we've celebrated in the past, but invite more people to be able to participate and to benefit and make a living.
So say that there's a creative, self-identifying creative listening right now who's feeling overwhelmed and threatened by all of the AI stuff that's out there right now, and is like, oh, I don't know which of these I should be using. I don't know what, my literacy on these things is not particularly good. What are some practical steps that people can take so they can feel like they're more on the ball with this sort of thing and they're not feeling overwhelmed?
Well, I think it's for everyone. I don't think it's limited to just creators necessarily. I think everyone's overwhelmed with all of this technology, and AI is can be very confusing. And even I struggle with, like, do I want to, be on Dolly, or do I want to be in Midjourney or Stable Diffusion, and try, you can't really be good at all of them. I think for anyone, the path is to try them all and see which ones resonate, because the skills set that you need for all of them, no matter what, is more about prompt engineering and then understanding how each of those, LLMs and the generative AI models actually work with the different prompts that you're using, and expand your knowledge, and just try like one or two different tools at a time. Like, Midjourney, there are a lot of YouTube creators out there that are doing all these great tutorials, and I've watched quite a few. And you can get really granular in terms of, not just the subject, but then, a paintbrush style, a particular oil, an aperture on a camera, and a particular camera and film stock. So, apply the things that you do know very, very well about how you would create in a traditional art form, and start learning the language so that you can translate that into AI. And I think we need to also not be so precious about IP. I recognize that people have a body of work that is their signature, but there are some great models out there that, where we're not just like, me, this is mine, you can't have it. But like Grimes, for example, put her voice out on AI, and it lives on a smart contract. And if you want to use it and create your own song, she's like, fine, don't be a jerk. Don't create something terrible, but you can use my voice. And if it's successful, we split the proceeds 50-50. And that is, I'm sure her IP attorney is like, why would you do that? But it's a way of thinking more expansively about creativity and co-creation, and using your creative clout to actually inspire other creators, as opposed to, I made this, it's mine, you can't touch it, you can't use it for anything. And I get the line in the sand around using it for commercial uses, or for companies to, like, put a backing track of something someone made onto one of their products and release a commercial. But we have laws for that already, right? How do we create this sort of, I don't know, engaging content where maybe I put out, and this is where, NFTs maybe, can have a resurgence again after all the nonsense that's happened in the last few years. You put out sort of the master NFT, which is similar to what Grimes has done. And so, like, this is my voice and you can use it. And then that master gives birth to a whole new realm of different music that touches different people, but it invites others to create with her. That model, there's a really significant business model there, right? Just waiting to be tapped. And so again, it's about perspective and thinking about things in a much kind of broader light.
And it all ultimately boils down to, no matter which tool you're using, no matter what idea you have, it's all about, as you say, storytelling, the fundamentals of engaging a viewer, or a reader, or whatever it is, and just knowing that that is, the fundamental basis that is underlying all of this.
It's interesting too, and you see like all of the remixes now, right? You can take someone else's work and remix it. I think that's starting to move in that direction, where we don't have to lock things down. And I think we'll find a balance where there might be certain creations that an artist might make where they don't necessarily want to share it, and that's okay. But I think all artists should consider both, and kind of opt into both, and also look at other artists that inspire them. I mean, I actually created my own server on Midjourney because I hate having to scroll through millions of different images. But every once in a while, I'll just go in and look at a few different channels and see what people are creating. And it's almost like our own, LLM. we are the product of everything we've ever seen or learned or absorbed. And so we're operating in a similar way, right? There's nothing that I'm creating necessarily that, it's the expression, there's no such thing as an original thought. It's like I'm looking at things and creating things based on other influences. And I may not be aware specifically of what those influences are, but there are, so many different artists specifically, as I actually am a photographer. And I have seen, many photographers whose work I absolutely love. And I know it influences the way that I look at creating an image. Can I draw lines specifically and say this is 10% this and this is 20% that? Not really. But you can definitely see influences. I can see influences in some of the things when I look back at it later on. I go, oh, that really reminds me of Slim Whitman or this other photographer, whoever it happens to be.
Do you still keep up that photography side of things, or is that kind of fallen by the wayside?
I do. I still have a website. I think it's amypeckimages.com. I don't add to it that much. I mean, I have so many images, and one day I'll update the website and put some new images up there because I travel so much that I have amazing images from all over the world.
In a recent episode, Mike Pell was talking about how he walks down, has the same commute every day to work, and he takes a photo every single day of something interesting and unique that he hasn't noticed before about his journey, and that keeps him observant. It keeps his eyes up, and he's not on his phone, and he's always like looking to seek new things out. Do you do anything like that to sort of keep your eyes looking for interesting things?
No, it's interesting. We did an exercise when I was in boarding school. That was one of the exercises that our photography teacher gave us, is that we were all tasked with going around and choosing 10 very public objects and take photographs of things that were sort of in all of the central areas within the school. And then we were going to put them all up on a wall. And then the idea was that we were going to decide, like, okay, where these things were. And it was the same concept, right? To make us more aware of what's around us. And it does lean into a lot of, I do research constantly. But one of my kind of early research projects a few years ago was on the science of mindfulness. And it's relevant to this because a lot of the scientific work that's being done on that is about the idea of being present and not necessarily relying on things that you think you learned that may or may not be relevant at that particular moment. So it's a similar thing, and I think it bleeds into the broader notion of just creative thought and having the, I don't know, I guess the fortitude and the belief in oneself that being present, and maybe it's what Mike does, right? He has to be present and aware to be able to notice something new on that walk. I know that walk. I've done that walk, many, many times.
And it brings in the tennis side of things as well, like having that sort of focus, because it's photography, but also the focus of like,
no pun intended,
looking around and being cognizant of your surroundings.
And it's interesting because I tell this to people, and I think people who aren't photographers don't get it. I remember many photographs that I didn't take for whatever reason. I just missed it, or I fumbled it, or I just didn't get the camera at time. But that the image, like the reason that I wanted to take the shot, is still kind of burned into my mind. And that's the same thing, and I think we were talking about flow earlier, when I used to really, take a lot of pictures, and I had a business doing fine art photography, and I was working with a very, very high end interior designer. I used to just, I'd be traveling somewhere for work, and I would get up really early in the morning, like 4 a.m. All the light was, it was still like this sort of blue, eerie nighttime. And I would just walk around. I wouldn't have a plan, but when it was working, it was very clear that I was just sort of in this flow, and I would photograph people and places and buildings. And it wasn't so much that I'm was a portrait photographer or a landscape photographer, or a travel photographer. It was really nothing specific. I just wanted to tell the story of my experience on that day in that place at that weird kind of hour, where the light started to shift pretty dramatically. Like it starts, they look night and they have this sort of, yellow sheen to them because the natural light is so blue. And then as the sun comes up, it shifts where it becomes much more, cool colors because the light is so warm, and the city starts to wake up, or the town, or whatever it is. And then typically I come across more people, and then you start to see the portraits and people just going about their day. And yeah, I mean, it's an interesting process. And I think people recognize when they're in the flow, but they don't necessarily know how to get there always.
Do you have any particular standout images from those projects that you did that come to mind?
Yeah, there was one guy, and this was, I think it was New Orleans, and I was outside this mission, and it was bathed in street lamps, but it was really even light, which is sort of rare at night to get this. And it was a beautiful building, and I started photographing the building, and then this guy kind of emerged from the side. So we were just talking, and he said, "Yeah, I had woken up and someone had stolen my clothes, and I didn't have any pants." And I thought, okay, this is an interesting conversation. But he was really very sad about the whole experience. And I asked him, I said, "Could I take a picture of you with this?" And I took a picture of him. It is on my website somewhere. And it's just one of those, it's like I remember the whole story. I remember the whole interaction with him. And there was something really sweet and really sad, and very human about that interaction. And so the photograph of him in front of the mission where he had gotten the clothes, it just was really, it was a nice moment. And I have many of those stories with where I've just come across people and we've just had this time together.
You're out at a time of day where there's no one else around to experience those.
Hopefully. I've had some unpleasant experiences too. But
There is an advantage of being out when no one else is around, but there's also possibly reasons why there's no one else around.
yeah, exactly.
So you do still do a little bit of photography. Do you still do any tennis? Do you have any other creative pastimes that keep the juices flowing?
I tore my rotator cuff, and it is a consistent injury. So I don't play tennis much anymore, but I do walk a lot. Because I travel, 200,000 miles a year. I think I was only home less than 100 days last year. We added up all the hotel nights and Airbnbs and everything. But going and just walking around a city, and it's not specifically for photography. It's just I want to go and walk and absorb the city and see the people. And you see things on foot that you don't when you're Ubering everywhere. And so that also is sort of meditative for me too, because I have a hard time just sitting still. I do meditate, but it's hard when I travel for some reason. I find it harder to just carve out the time because I am interested in where I am. So if I have time where I'm not working, I do like to go and wander around. And I think that does it's beneficial on a number of fronts.
I mean, it can be kind of meditative to walk around just a city and
Oh yeah.
not have music in and just sort of take in the sights and smells and everything.
I love it. It's one of my favorite pastimes, and I always see something interesting, right?
People in previous podcasts have spoken about how much walking helps them to process their thoughts, and in particular if it's walking in nature. I don't know if you have a sense of how walking in a forest is different to walking in a city. Is there a big difference in that?
Yeah, I think so. I think I'm much more drawn to being in cities in general. I mean, I'm a city person anyway. Um, Generally, when I go walking, or if I do like a hike in the woods or on a trail somewhere, generally that's with someone else, and that's more of a shared experience for me. There's something I really enjoy about being in a city on my own, and being so solitary, but sort of surrounded by so many things. But then when I really want to unplug, I kind of prefer to do that with a friend or a colleague or someone I'm, traveling with, or when I'm home. I mean, I live in California, and there's incredibly beautiful places to go, all over California. That was one of the nice things about, the bonuses of COVID is that developing just better habits, like sleeping more, going out and walking every day, because there just wasn't anything else to do. And that was a weird form of socializing, because you would at least pass people and you'd see people. And so it was a way to still feel strangely connected to people when it was such a disconnected time.
Do you think that creatively, the pandemic just generally enabled you more creatively with more time and more sleep and time working at home, not traveling, or do you think it hindered you in the long run?
So I really found it liberating in some ways to have time back and to think about the things in. I think it was more reflective. I think that's what it brought about more than creativity specifically. I think I was just more reflective of, like, what are the things that are important to me? What do I care about? And then what are the things that I feel like I probably need to really change, and that gave me kind of the time and the focus and the space to be able to make some positive changes in my life, which I think I still, I carried quite a few of them kind of into the post-COVID world. So I think all in all, despite how horrible it was for everybody, there's a silver lining.
And did you get to do more podcasts during that time period?
I don't remember if we recorded a lot. I think we've done a lot of episodes. I think we've done over 100 episodes for sure. So I think we did more. And in fact, I haven't done quite as many this year as we did in the last, I think we're on season 4.
And with all the interviews that you've done in these podcasts, and I imagine there's lots of different golden nuggets of information that you get from everybody. And then you do these talks on big stages around the world. How do you digest and retranslate what these people have said into these digestible takeaways in your talks?
The podcast is very specific to an industry, and then towards the end of season 3, I had asked if we could start doing like a futurist series. That wasn't necessarily people in the AEC industry, but people who have their fingers on the pulse of technology and futurism, and are again using technology in these sort of very creative ways. So that's sort of one avenue. My talks are born out of, like, I tackle these research subjects, like mindfulness was one, and then I work to build business strategies based on technologies or science and the combination thereof, and behavioral science. And then I try and distill that into just is food for thought. That's the goal. I don't purport to have all the answers, but there's so much information out there that I think in some ways we're not necessarily combining it in new ways. And so that is my through line. That's what I'm always looking to do. So when I get curious, like right now, I'm doing a lot of research on human performance, and there's a lot of different avenues around it. So it's sort of, mind, body, spirit, but it's also, when you think about human performance in the military sense, right? It's elite training. And so there's a physical component to it. So it's looking at all of these elements, and then looking at some of the science and neuroscience around, what makes us perform at optimal levels in sort of all of these, areas of humanity. And then how do we distill that down in a way that is not only digestible, but is then actionable for our clients. But I mean, the goal is for any talk to be interesting to anybody, but then have applications in different avenues of one's life. Like that's my hope. I don't always know if I make the mark, but that's the goal.
One word for you: tennis. That'll do it. That's all you need. All of the projects and all of the work that you've done, the photography, the podcasts, the XR stuff that you do now. Are there any of the projects that you are particularly fond of looking back?
Yeah, my kids. They were my favorite project.
Yeah.
Now it's just so great being able to see them be these adult two men. I've got two boys, 16 months apart, and just seeing them, carve their way in the world. There's nothing better.
Well, and it's interesting because they're at a point in their lives now where, the space ahead of them in terms of the industries that they're going to be working in is changing so rapidly. And I think the statistic is something like 65% of children now who are being born now are going to be doing jobs that don't even exist yet, or maybe even more than 65%. And based on your experience of adapting to a rapidly changing industry, what advice do you give them?
One of my sons is studying law. He's at NYU, and he's going to have I think, a fairly kind of linear legal path, at least to start. Um, and I think he may or may not practice law for the rest of his life. He's using it as kind of a basis for his early career, but then to help him shape his later career. And then my other son is just a pure entrepreneur, kind of, creative spirit. So my advice to them is a little bit different on each side because they approach life very differently. Um, but at the end of the day, I just try and share with them things that I find interesting. Like in law, I think this whole idea around IP is really going to change. And this is not just an opportunity to practice law. It's an opportunity to really shape the way that the law supports artists in this new realm of IP with blockchain and AI and just everything and technology. And then the other one is sort of an e-commerce expert, very, very creative. And his is I talked to him about how interesting it is to tell stories around, instead of just traditional advertising. How do you tell stories around your product to make them compelling? And so it's not advice per se, it's more just conversational things that I think are interesting that may impact their respective businesses in the future. And sometimes there's uptake and sometimes not. But it's really fun just to watch them navigate the world.
And introspectively, how do you see, looking into the crystal ball, how do you see yourself, maturing as an artist and as a CEO in this rapidly changing field? And do you have any role models?
Well, I don't want to mature. I don't ever want to be mature. So I'm not gonna. No, I really love everything that I'm doing, and I feel I'm incredibly fortunate. So for me, it's more of the same. I want to do more. I love working with amazing people. I love surrounding myself with amazing people, and I think I've been able to do that. And my lifestyle has afforded me that opportunity as well. And I really, at my core, believe that technology can fundamentally change how we do everything, and everything for the better. And I think there's a better way of thinking about things for almost everything that we do. And so I'm just going to keep working on that.
Is there ever any moments or times, maybe when you're on stage in front of thousands of people, that you experience the imposter syndrome, or are you not afflicted by that, as many creatives are?
I definitely, when I'm not when I'm on stage, but every once in a while, I, I I'll work on a project that becomes so big that it's more daunting than imposter syndrome. I just kind of think, wow, how am I going to solve this problem? um, and sometimes there's just not. That's sort of the nice thing about my work, is there's not necessarily a beginning, middle, and end. There are to the projects, but in the work is often kind of incremental. And so, I think that when I am feeling overwhelmed, I think my go-to strategy is to kind of take a step back and then just look at how far we've all come. And that sort of that it doesn't solve the problem at hand necessarily, but at least it shows that there's progress, and so we've accomplished so much. And I say we collectively, but also, with me and my colleagues and within my company, we will get through and we will come to a conclusion, and then that will help us color the next big thing that we're working on.
We're quickly running out of time, so one last thing, the final question that I always ask people at the end of these podcasts: what is, in your definition, what is creativity to you?
It's like surfing a wave, right? You don't know how the wave's going to break or which way you're going to break with the wave, but if you're willing to paddle out into the sea and just be calm and quiet when the right wave comes, and hopping on your board, even if your form's terrible, and just riding it. It's like the prep work is in being prepared and getting the board and paddling out to creativity, but then just ride the wave and let it see where it takes you, is sort of that trust piece, in trusting that your creativity will get you to where you need to go, even if you have a big tumble and you scrape your shoulder on the bottom of the sea, which I'm so specific because I have done that. And yeah, and just, and have fun. And I think everything is creative. You don't have to see yourself as an artist per se to be creative. I think there's creativity in everything we do. And allow yourself the ability to be more expansive in your thinking. And that is at the core of creativity.
Beautifully said. And that reminds me of there's some graphs that someone made somewhere that is like the creative journey, and there's all these peaks and troughs, and even if it feels like you're in sort of a minor trough right now, if you sort of zoom out and look at it in a more macro way, you're still on an upward slope in the grand scheme of things. So
yeah
well, thank you so much, Amy. I'm sure we could chat more for hours and hours on end, but
let's let everybody go.
yes, I really appreciate you for joining me. I appreciate everybody who's listening, who's listened this far, and I look forward to seeing possibly you in DC. I look forward to seeing your future creative projects. And yeah, thanks again for joining us.
Thanks so much, Aidan.